We are lighting the candle, a world that works. And as usual, I'm Bill Correll, and I've got with me my really great friend, Jeremias. And we're going to just, hop in here. We were just talking about the storms that we had here recently, which were really unseasonable. And in our neck of the woods, even as high as our elevation are, any low points that were in streets and what have you, were flooded, and we had branches down and trees down and power lines down. And it's not kind of usual for us this time of year. It happens a lot more, it seems, in the fall than in the dead of summer. So, and you were talking in terms of a house where you are right now, and the pool being full of all sorts of probably tree branches and clusters of leaves and who knows what. But
Exactly. It was. I mean, and it, poor. I mean, I don't want to like get this, but there was this poor little like baby animal in the pool,
oh,
and I felt so bad. And it looked like it was tiny. And I thought to myself, like the winds they said were up to 70 mile an hour. So, I mean, I'm assuming that he probably just got swept in or whatever, but it was
yeah.
just so, or was on a branch and fell off but I just felt so bad. And yeah, I'm trying to clean up and stuff for where I'm staying, but it was pretty. I think the thing about big storms is they make you feel very small, like very, very
Powerless is the word that I
powerless.
felt the other night.
Yeah. Yeah, powerless, I think small, like vulnerable
Yeah,
and fragile. You're kind of like sitting there going, okay, you know, I'm gonna like I think prayer would be a good thing right now, or meditation, or just intention, whatever you want to label it as.
yeah, I think I could feel the prayer in my neighborhood the other night. There is no doubt about it. Well, first of all, I think it was Jan had already gone to bed, and so when the alert went off, it woke her out of a sound sleep. And all of a sudden, I'm looking at this thing, and it's saying, "Get to a safe place in your home, basement or inside, away from windows." Gusts up to 80 miles an hour. Now that's not usual. I mean, even a tornado warning is usually gusts between 50 and 65 miles an hour or 70 miles. But the long and the short of it is that's all there was. And then I went and looked at where the map was on the weather page, and the front was right over the top of Willimantic. And I said, "Holy moly, we're in the middle of this one." So I went and got my wife, and she said, "I'm going to sleep." And I said, "Well, okay." So I crawled in next to her, and it was loud, and there were thumps against the side of the house, and it was just crazy. The next morning, there was debris everywhere.
And I remember being one other storm that was like where I remember being in the house, and I was in New Jersey in my old house, and I could hear the branches cracking. The wind was so strong. And I remember thinking to myself and just praying nothing should hit the house. It was just like, please don't hit the house.
For sure.
And, but I could hear them outside. I mean, I know somebody by you got killed, didn't they?
Yes, he did. He was hit by a branch down at Father Honan Terrace, and it was such a sad thing. I think the guy was in his 50s, and just happened to be wrong place, wrong time, and it was apparently immediate. So
Yeah, it's very similarly. I remember this same storm I was just referring to in New Jersey. Somebody got killed that time, a few miles from me, same county, and it was the same thing. Got struck by a tree.
you know, we're always looking for metaphors in life, and a storm is usually a pretty good metaphor. You stop and think about, comes out of nowhere, you have no control over it, and what was it called? There was a book about a mariner, 30 days before the mast or something like that. And in the midst of a typhoon, all he could do was strap himself to the mast, and he was unconscious, from being beaten around so much by the wind and the surf. So yeah, you got to do that to survive first, and then you go out and you take stock of what's actually happened.
Mm-hmm.
And I think some people, to kind of carry the metaphor out a little bit, do you ever find that some people continue cleaning up the mess after the mess is already cleaned?
Yeah, I think some people do that. You know, I think, depending on my mindset, I can find myself doing that because sometimes it's kind of like, you know, I'm picking up branches, but then all of a sudden I'm picking up twigs,
Yeah.
kind of thing. Um, but also I think, because I think it's a way to make us feel like we're in control, like there's something about it we can do as opposed to being, like we said, so vulnerable and helpless
Right.
in the grand scheme. I think the other thing that happens is sometimes, like every situation we learn and we're like, okay, well, next time, what could I do different that maybe there isn't anything I can do differently.
Yes, I think the world is full of what can we do so that never ever happens again, whatever it was.
Whatever it was.
And I think from a standpoint of living a life that's fulfilled and self-expressed and has happiness and joy in it and that sort of thing, I'm wondering if the attention on those kinds of preventative actions where you really have to be looking in the rear view mirror back over your shoulder where you came from, but all your life's out in front of you, and then if you can just take a moment and just kind of like decide. I know people that don't pick up anything. They just wait for the seasons to take it away, or I'll mow
Mhm.
that next week or whatever it is.
Right. No, absolutely. And I think, I know, I mean, I think there are aspects of my life where I'm like that. And then there are other aspects where I'm not, it's kind of interesting. And I think we're all like that to some extent. It's like we pick and choose, where our focus is, what we're good at, those kinds of things. And we kind of work with those versus kind of going to the places which maybe we find scary or we don't know. I always say to people, I know so little about gardening. Like, I love plants, but I don't know anything. And so doing cleanup I can do, and I feel like I'm doing something outside, and I like being outside. But as far as like planting and, and just doing stuff, I mean, I really don't know a whole lot.
Yeah.
And it was just not a place where I chose to spend my energy. I mean, it just wasn't through the years. And as I get older, I think I have much more drawing to it than I ever did.
Yeah.
Um, and I think it's interesting that I do. It's almost like I want to go back to roots, like go back to the basics. Like I think I would be, I lead a farmer's life as far as my hours go because I'm very early to bed and early to rise.
Yep.
And years ago, I had a friend who said to me, I was talking about dating, and she said to me, "You should marry a farmer." And because she knew my hours. And then I looked it up, and there's actually a farmer's like dating website.
Oh, that's fun.
And it was so funny. So I sent it to her, but it was so funny because she was like, "Oh, you should marry a farmer. You're up at 4 or 5 and you like to go to bed by like when, dusk or whatever." And
Yeah.
so we each have our kind of, but it is funny. I think we tend to be drawn to certain things that,
I love what you're saying, and of course, our experience is a little different than yours. Where we live here has been in my wife's family since the 1800s, and I don't think about this very often. But when we moved in, the house was 100 years old that year that we moved in. So there was already a lot of a lot of greenery, flowering trees, um, you name it. And then after we moved in, Jan was raised on a farm in Chaplin, not more than 20 minutes from here. Her mom would bring all sorts of things down here and plant them. And they're still here today. So we went all those years, and probably for the first dozen years or so we were here, we always had a garden. And as a result of that, kind of being, she actually, her degree was in forage crops and animal sciences from University of Connecticut. And so we never put anything on the ground, no pesticides. We never put on any, we may have put some kind of a nitrogen type product, but nothing else in it, just something to kind of give the plants a boost. So yes, we learned a lot about a lot of different things. And then we also found out that there were some that were impossible to kill, no matter how bad we were at taking care of them. These are the survivor plants. I mean, these plants have been around longer than Keith Richards. So
it's raining out now. So interesting. I'm like, I didn't know
and the
that
sun's out.
Yeah, and the sun's out. I'm like, it's raining. I'm like, as we talk about storms, I'm like, is it supposed to rain?
It's been goofy weather, on Saturday when
it says it's drizzling, and I have to tell you, it's not drizzling.
It's drizzling a lot, huh?
Yeah, it's drizzling hard. It's a hard drizzle.
Well, I forgive you. You clearly got distracted there for a minute.
Sorry. But all of a sudden I'm looking out and I'm like, what is that noise? And I look up and I'm like, oh, it's raining out. Sorry about that, Bill.
No apology necessary. I was just, kind of like just telling the story and maybe probably telling too much. So back on the metaphor, okay?
Right.
There are times when the cleanup really is called for, and there's times when it's really worth your while to notice what occurred and what you're finding during the cleanup, things that you really didn't think would be susceptible to high winds and stuff like that. And without getting really too deep into this particular train of thought, there's just always something to notice, and for a lot of people, there are distractions and interruptions and, the old squirrel, and the next thing you know, you never do get any further on that because you're back in on the phone talking to somebody about what is this plant that I found,
But as I think about storms, like I remember being a kid. And literally, we would go out and ride our bikes in the rain, and we would purposely go through puddles and, get as muddy as possible. And it was so much fun. Yes. Like we would come in and we would be sopping wet and have to peel our clothes off, basically. And, I grew up in, I grew up in Vernon on the, Ellington border. So it was rural, especially when I was young. So we lived through that, but it reminds me of so even within the storm, not to say, it is a little scary, but this whole idea of a rainbow during a storm or after a storm, and the quote that comes to mind is, life isn't about waiting for the storm to pass. It's about learning to dance in the rain.
I love that.
And, that's what it makes me think of, those moments where we would really appreciate things like that and go out. I remember one of my favorite things to do in my old house, in my yoga room, which was like a real studio. I had skylights. And I would go in during a storm and lay on my mat and watch the lightning happen because I could see it through the skylights. And it was just the most amazing experience to lie there and appreciate it. And I think that's one thing, when I look at a storm like that, it's just I don't know. I guess I believe in whatever that higher power is. It reminds me that there's something far greater than myself that exists in this world.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. I remember, good Lord, probably 5 years old in Cheyenne, Wyoming. It was me and my two brothers. Tommy at that point was probably a year old. Dave was probably 2 years old, and I was just about 5 years old, maybe four and a half. And we were scared. I mean, really scared during these thunder boomers that we would have out there. And my mom would say, "Don't worry about that. That's just God bowling." Oh, he got a strike. Oh, picked up a spare.
Well, I was actually on Zoom with Kate last week,
Yeah,
and she was telling me that the other night when it was thundering, her daughter said to her, "Oh, Dad's bowling again." And I said to her that would make a great title. We all decided that would make a great title for a children's book.
absolutely.
And on loss, like kind of thing. But yeah, there is this real like element of awe is a good word.
Well, we talk about being in a situation where the circumstances dictate our state of being and our state of mind. Okay. However, when we notice that there's something going on that's kind of uncomfortable, it's like the other night I had fear. I mean, I could just picture somebody's, picnic table being launched through one of our big windows that we've got on the side of the house or something like that. And I thought to myself, there's not a darn thing I can do about this. Why don't I just see if I can make some kind of a game out of it or bring some joy here, like authentically and not just like, Pollyanna coded over and act as if. But no, as I had a hard time doing it, as a matter of fact, but I finally got there because I went to sleep and got woke up 5 minutes later by the lightning and thunder crashing right overhead. One of those deals where the thunder claps and the light comes right now. There's no waiting for it or the light whatever. And I looked over and I looked at my wife and I said, "Got us, didn't it?" And we both giggled.
Yeah, there's something about it, like, and then Tonka being so sensitive to noise, it's a like that's really when I realized how animal senses are so much more sensitive than ours because
Yeah,
it'll happen to me where like it happened with us where all of a sudden he starts to act really funny and I'm
yeah,
like, why are you acting funny? And then like 10 minutes later all of a sudden there'll be a big clap of thunder and I'll be like, oh, that's why.
yeah. And I believe their ears are also really sensitive to the low pressure. It hurts. Okay,
Right.
and they
Yeah.
they can feel that coming on like children.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
Kids are the same, and it's just kind of the same thing if you're driving up the side of a mountain and all of a sudden a baby starts crying. There's not really anything else that they can do because their ears are hurting, and they don't know how to relieve the pressure or you know
Right.
but and that's the other thing that's kind of cool, being in a situation where there's somebody else to take care of while while this is going on. That kind of calls forth whatever leader there is in you, or whatever sense of responsibility, or just the desire to make somebody else a little bit less afraid. I can imagine my mom probably had some feelings and that she was kind of concerned herself, but no, that's just God bowling.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I mean, and then there's the point where you realize that there really is not a whole lot you can do.
Right.
Like when Tonka is stressed, I mean, I could do anything. It's not really going to read. The best thing for him to do is to eventually, he finds like a spot where he feels safe, whether
Right.
that, and he kind of huddles and kind of hugs the wall and, kind of in that area. And he eventually will lay down, but that usually takes a while.
Sure.
And so, any place where he's not going to feel so exposed and so vulnerable. And so, but like I said, that can take a while sometimes. And I just, and I do everything else I can do for him. But then you realize that, it just needs to pass.
Yeah. It's kind of funny. While you were speaking, I was thinking about people who are not in a storm. but people who are living their lives as if they are.
Mm.
And I think I'll just come out with a generality, not like it's true or not true or anything, but it just seems to me like there are so many people right now who are really not having fun. You know, I mean, that's the kind of the feeling I'm left with. Yes, they will come out and play and have fun, and it takes a minute to get them out on the playground. And at the same time, um, I'm just hearing so many different people who are in the midst of some kind of financial stagnation, or their small business isn't just, they can't get business the way they used to, and all of those sorts of things. And what it comes down to is that it's almost like there's this mass hypnosis where people have all drank the same thing, and they're all feeling like, I'll just wait this out. Or maybe it's more like, well, maybe there's just nobody out there for me any longer at this point. Or when the timing is right, it will come. But but what I always see missing, and I've had conversations with maybe 4 or 5 people in the last 2 weeks, and it's always kind of the same thing where, no, I'm no longer doing any volunteer work. No, I'm not part of that thing either. And by the way, those people are all starting to annoy me now. And it just kind of like goes into that. And yes, I could do those things if I wanted to, but I just really don't want to. And so,
Well, I think that, when we surround, like when we're in that place, and I think we've spoken about, I've been in that place a number of times over the last months. Um, that I think it's very hard sometimes to kind of get out of it, especially when you look around you and everything outside, like I want to say outside in the world, seems so negative and dire,
oh
whether
yeah,
that be health or politics or global affairs, or
just the weather. I mean,
the weather, wars happening in a number of places, like I think that, and the list goes on and on. And I think it's one thing to go through a bad time or a hard time. Let's just say not necessarily bad. I don't want to label bad, a hard time.
right.
Um, and and then the world around you is kind of okay. But to go through it when there's this element of, like, I want to say hopelessness,
Yes.
makes it really challenging to get through. Um, yeah, it just does.
I'm kind of letting that sink in for a second. Um,
I
and
mean,
I
I have
want
to,
to just
yeah, go ahead.
also,
Yeah, go
pardon
ahead.
me?
Please go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I- and I almost am feeling like there's a what's the use? Kind of like, I could, if I really wanted to. Yeah, I know all those things intellectually, and I could. But, when the bills come and there's nothing there to pay them, or you figure out a way to get it done that time and then go right back into the funk again, there's no lesson there. It's not like an aha that you got from cleaning out the pool. You know what I'm saying?
Right. And no, I agree. And, I have a friend who, always reminds me that it's helpful to sit there and, like, kind of, be thankful that you got to pay it for that time or whatever, or that month.
Yeah.
And she's like, just remember, she said, because I always used to say to her that paying bills is my least favorite time of the month. And
Right.
she said, it's actually my favorite time because I'm always so thankful that I actually can pay what I pay. So, kind of shifted me. Not that it necessarily works a lot of the time, but it's definitely something I can kind of plant in my head. Um, and I find that, with all the tools that you and I both know, sometimes those tools have to be honest. Like, you have to decide how they can work for you. So, for example, everybody always says journal, 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 journal. And I love writing and I do journal, but when I'm in a place like you were describing and I journal, all I journal is negativity. Like, that's what I write down. And I sit there and I look at the journal, and first of all, it's depressing. It's really depressing. I look at what I wrote down, even if I don't go back over days, but let's say that day, and I think to myself, "Oh my gosh." And it even makes it worse because I've actually, yes, I've done a brain dump where I've actually, or an emotional dump where I've actually spilled everything out onto the paper.
Right.
But it really doesn't necessarily make me feel any better. And then recently I had a friend who said to me, "Well, try meditating before you write." And so I've been listening to guided meditations, and I've been listening to a few other things and then journaling, and it really helps. Like, cuz then I'm journaling from a much more positive space, and I think writing it down has that other, like, sort of imprint in the brain
Yeah.
where I feel like I've seen a pretty big shift for myself. And I'm not saying that necessarily works every day either, but it definitely works quite a bit of the time for me. And it was just really interesting to me because I mean, I don't think, with everything that we do, I don't think through the years, I don't know how many workshops or programs I went to where they would say you should journal every day, like, write down every day. And I used to think, you know,
Well,
doesn't
see,
work.
yeah, the journaling, um, I think it hits a certain type of a person more than it hits other people.
Mhm.
Right brain people less so. Left brain people who are into feelings and that whole sensitivity thing, uh, like something to really spend your time dwelling in. And there's you and me. Sometimes we're just the facts and let's get on with it, sort of folks. But there isn't a right way to journal. And when I've worked with my clients, my coaching clients, and just people who worked for me, and I said, there's a reason you write things down. And they said, "Oh yeah, what is that?" I said, "Well, because tell me what you were thinking yesterday at 10 o'clock in the morning." They go, "What?" And I go, "Yeah, so tell me what you were thinking yesterday at 10 o'clock in the morning." "I don't know. I don't remember." Exactly. So if you want to have a thought continue through time so that you can examine it as a completely different human being later on and see if there's anything there to notice or anything to learn about yourself, that gives you a different context for journaling. It's like when we were going to school, we were sitting through those mundane algebra classes and geography and you name it. It's like, I know I'm just never going to be using theorems, when I get out of school. What, what's the point of learning how to do a truth table? And well, for me, it was like we didn't have Rubik's cubes in those days and we didn't have Tetris. So it was like Tetris for me. Math always was like that. And at the same time, when sitting down later and looking at these mundane things that we did in algebra, trig, calculus, and all the rest, it just came right back. Those synapses fired like automatically. Oh yeah, okay. The whole, what is interpolation? What is estimating? What is all these things that, yeah, I do use that crap every day, don't I? I just don't call it that.
Right. And yeah, I mean, sometimes I think we get stuck on the labels
Yeah,
of things and the idea of things. And we also attach to a particular way of doing something.
right.
And that's why, like, I have never been, and I'm not saying there are points in my life where I do sit for meditation all the time, like
Right.
I'm going to sit. And I've been on that path for a good number of weeks now. But that doesn't mean that at points I don't go through periods where I do walking meditations or
Yeah,
where I do other forms. I mean, and then when I sit, I might do different forms. I might do mantras, I might do affirmations, I might do um, meditations that are guided, so I'm not attached to a particular, because some of that depends on where I am. Like if sometimes if I'm really agitated, asking me to go sit in one space is really hard.
Yeah.
And I spend the whole time kind of sitting there going, I really don't want to be here. Like
You're resisting it, but your other side of your brain is saying yes, but it's going to feel so good after you actually get it done.
That's right. That's right. Exactly. And, hello. Tonka's agreeing. And
Yes,
so, okay. Yeah. Okay. Shh.
So I got something for you to consider, and you at home too. If it doesn't really seem like being mindful and meditating, or even just closing your eyes and being quiet for 5 minutes is the right way to go, watch a Seinfeld episode. Just do something, to take your mind away from what's in front of you. That's like the soup you can't see. And whatever it is that reminds you that you can and should be joyful, because that's what you said you wanted. Okay. If you're not being joyful and you said you wanted to be, well, as Joe Rogan would say, dude, nobody else is going to do it for you.
That's
It's
right.
really important to be responsible about things like that. It's you. There's nobody else here for the rest of your life that's going to care as much about your state of mind as you do. They will for minutes at a time, but not like you do. You live with yourself all day.
All day. And then the other thing is, like I always say, when you're in regard to health, like you better than anybody.
Yes.
The doctor can tell you things, and yes, and I'm not saying, like testing is necessarily, is wrong. I'm not saying that, but if I always use the example, if you get back something like blood test results and you still don't feel well, listen to you, and because you know yourself better than anybody else does. And once you start to do that, you all of a sudden realize, and you don't necessarily know the reason. I mean, it could be something like the weather or barometric pressure or something. Like yesterday, I was feeling like really wobbly. And I was like, what it was just like, what is this, kind of thing. But I was also very tired. Even though I had slept, I was feeling really tired. And I was like, okay, well, I am really tired. This morning I got up and I got a good night's sleep and I feel so much better today. Could have been the fact that I was a little bit dehydrated because yesterday was really hot. And so maybe I didn't drink enough, and I start to go through all those things. But it is this feeling of like, I know me better than anybody knows me.
Well, yes. And you can always learn more.
That's right. And you can always learn more. That's right. You can always learn more, and you can always, there's always space for more.
I agree. And I think if there's anybody who's going to do diagnostics, self-diagnostics are really, really powerful, simply because there's no one else to impress. You're not going to filter your reactions or your thoughts, or you'll notice it if you do sometimes. And when you do, then you can step back and you can say, well, okay, is that really it? Or what else could it be here? And I'll tell you what, it's really a great feeling when you finally break through and have an aha moment. We live for those, don't we?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think there is a lot to be said when we have an aha moment, when all of a sudden, maybe something all of a sudden clicks and we put it together. And I think for me, maybe it was something like I just shared, was that realizing that I couldn't attach to, let's say, a particular form of meditation,
Right.
that I should kind of welcome and literally see what works for me on that given day. And yes, like I said, go through periods and then when it doesn't work, you're kind of like, why isn't that working today? That's worked for the last 3 weeks. And, and it was fine. And all of a sudden today, it's like not working for me. And you sit there probably for a day or two trying and then realizing it's not going to work. I have to switch something up. Like you think it's like, for me, I sit there and I think to myself, well, maybe it's a fluke. Maybe it's just something going on for that particular day. So I don't necessarily rush out of it. But then if I sit down the next day and I can't sit, I'm like, okay, this is really interesting. Or like I get curious versus get critical. I think that's probably a really good transition. because I think so much of the time we get critical of ourselves.
Yeah, I agree with you. Like, this should be working and it's not. What's wrong with me? You are just such a gunky or whatever. But the neat part of all of it is that human beings are recipe, formula, habit slash procedure process junkies, and should have for every input a predictable and affirming output. And life just
You're talking, the scientist in me is just loving that.
wow.
You know.
I mean, we do behave, and that's why sometimes it takes you, 300 or 400 experiments using the same type of stuff to get the results you're actually predicting. But we love it when we get what we predict the first and second time. But then when it doesn't happen for the next 14 or 15 times, we're like, what's going on around here? What did I do?
Right, exactly. What did I do? What changed? Something. But it is really funny how we are attached to routine.
Yeah.
The same kind of procedural kind of thing.
Tell me how to do it. Tell me how to do it. You know what I mean? Just tell me how to do it.
But then to be on the other side, because I was saying sometimes I need to change it up. There's something very, sometimes when my mind is going 1,000 miles a minute and I have whatever thoughts, let's say negative, anxiety, whatever it's going through, doing a very mundane task that's very repetitive is very calming. Like recently I got into beading, so I'll sit down and I bead bracelets, it's something like, okay, well, I can put a bead on a little string and make something pretty, and I'm mindful and I'm doing it. It gives me enough space. But sometimes those rote kind of actions.
Yes.
Like I almost, and I'm not being critical of anybody's job. Like, don't get me wrong.
No.
But at all, because I value what each and every person does. I really do. But every now and then I'm like, well, I would be really happy right now if I could just go, clean windows for an hour, kind of thing,
Yeah, the how you get to mastery is by mastering the mundane. And no matter where you are in life, you had to do all those mundane, repetitive things enough times to where it was part of who you are. And that gives you the ability to kind of like create and go on to other things and higher levels of challenge, which in many cases, when you're first learning something and you are consciously incompetent about it, it doesn't feel mundane at all. It feels like, what the dickens? Why? Come on now.
Well, I was listening to the podcast The Way Out Is In.
Yep.
Which is a podcast from Plum Village, where Thich Nhat Hanh's monastery originally. And the guy, the gentleman who's now the head of the monastery, was talking about being on a monastery. Basically, you have to do every job. Like you have to go through and he said, and it was just so interesting to listen to him because he talked about what pride he took in cleaning the bathrooms.
Everything you do.
Yes. Everything you do. He said there was such pride in knowing that it was going to be clean and pristine for someone else afterwards who used it.
Yes.
And there's something so, I don't even know the right word. Like part of me is precious, honorable, like about that attitude, about taking such joy, literally, out of what we might, what people might think is like, to be, for a lack of another word, disgusting kind of jobs, Yep. But then when he was talking about it and the fact that he was not good at it, like certain things in the kitchen, like he said he was he said he just wasn't fast enough, like to be, let's say, he could be like a good assistant. If I remember, he could be a good, don't quote me on this, but I think he said he could have been a good like sous chef or assistant, but he was not meant to be like the lead. He said he just wasn't fast enough.
Yep.
Cut that fast for the number of people they were serving and things like that. So, but I thought to myself, to take such joy in those tasks which we consider unimportant or important, but we would never want to do them.
Yeah, oftentimes in our Western civilization, probably in other civilizations also, but people get promoted to their highest level of ineffectivity. Okay, that's the principle. You will be promoted to your highest level of ineptitude, you know, and almost always will continue to get promoted until you can't do the job and you're an abject failure. Now, the really cool part of that is you want to do that in life as quickly as possible so that you get to that level, recognizing whatever was easy to get you there in the first place. This is what your life was really intended to get you at, at mastery level for. And so if you look around, everybody you know is doing a job that they do because they finally hit a spot somewhere where they're getting paid just enough money not to quit and working just hard enough not to get fired, in many cases. If out of 100 people, there might be 5 or 10 that are just like burning it up and looking for the next challenge and saying, no, I can do more, and never seem to hit a wall. And
Right.
what I noticed with those people, Jan, and there was a period of time when I considered myself one of them, was when I got to that level where they always kept telling me, you don't have a college degree, you're going to burn out here very quickly, we're going to get to the end of your rope. And I just kept saying, keep tossing me more,
Hmm.
bring it, you know. And when I got to that point, I knew I had to ask for help. That was really healthy. And I
Mm.
watched other people crash and burn because they couldn't ask for help.
It's very interesting. Like you bring up such a valid and beautiful point. I think it's, there is a special kind of person that can go into a situation and admit they don't know something,
Yes.
admit they need help or they've reached their limit. Uh,
Yes.
I think I looked at all the different healing modalities, kind of like that I learned through the years that I've added to my repertoire, even if it's not like quote unquote to sit there and say, I do, I help people with this or I can do this for people. I always use every part of it because it's not like, I learned it. So it's incorporated into everything, what I do and who I am.
Yes.
And and that's why I think I never felt like I was going to limit myself to one kind of practice or one sort of healing modality because I don't think that there's just one. And I think there are specific ones I might suggest to people in particular situations, like, oh, you might want to try this.
Yes.
But I don't know. I think we're too multidimensional to think that only one thing is going to help and to
Well,
think that we're limited by only one degree or one subject perfection or excel, to be able to excel at something. Because I think there's more space to learn about stuff that maybe you don't want to go into and add to your career or add to your repertoire, but it's just interesting.
yes. Yeah. You familiar with the term dharma?
Yeah, sure.
And so essentially, it's kind of like there are laws of nature, and there are things that work and things that don't work, and we don't get to vote on those. And ignore dharma at your own peril. Uh, when you are not doing well in life, if you're struggling mentally, physically, spiritually, metaphysically, whatever, it's because there is some kind of an out integrity where you're not in alignment with the laws of nature. And it's an opportunity to stop what you're doing long enough to see what's missing. And if we could train ourselves to see failure as a contribution to our culture and to our society and to our family, like your job on earth is to fail, okay? Like, and have that be an amazing opportunity as opposed to, and then you try to fail as frequently as you can, and like we're not wired for that psychologically. We don't get the tools that we need where, like, somebody, can you even imagine how there would be a Tiger Woods or a Michael Jordan or name somebody who was really, or a Tesla, or an Enrico Fermi, or Marie Curie, or you just keep thinking about people who have a lasting name. They didn't consider themselves all that much. All they knew was they had this idea that they could keep doing one more thing. And they usually were, it was everyone around them is yammering at them saying, ain't gonna work, can't do it. Other people tried, they never did it. You're not gonna do it, you know? And and when you get to the point where Tiger Woods, for example, creates the opportunity to have 50 or 60 other people in professional golf that are capable of doing now what he was one of the first ones to be able to do consistently, it just makes the game better, right? And so what if you and I are cleaning the bathroom with that in mind, that what this is all about is my wife's going to come in here, and it's going to be like a safe place for her, to put her makeup on, or to wash it off, or whatever.
Well, as you were talking about failure, it reminded me of years ago, I listened to an interview with Sarah Blakely, who was the creator of Spanx.
Okay.
And so she's a
Thank you for that, because I did not know who she was.
She's a self-made billionaire, and she talked about a story from her childhood that completely reframed failure in my eyes, and I think for many. She said in her household at dinner time, when dinner time came, there was a particular ritual that happened, and each day her father would ask them all, "How did you fail today?" And I thought it was so interesting, because I remember that wasn't something that ever would have a conversation that would have ever happened at my house. You kind of buried failures. You didn't talk about them in open kind of conversation. Not that we talked about, I don't know, I don't remember as a child what we talked about, but that would not have been one of them. And I thought it was so interesting to actually, and if they didn't have anything to share, it was kind of like, it was like not a good thing. Like, he really felt that they should have gone out during the day to do something where they tried and they didn't succeed. Yeah. And I loved that, because I thought to myself, it totally reframes failure, where failure is not a bad thing. If you don't fail, then you're not stepping out of your comfort zone. Then you're not doing anything that, I mean, I think being in business all these years, and you've been in your own business for much longer, I think, than I have. I mean, for me, it's like, I don't know, 15 years or something, but it's just like, I've done a lot of things which have failed. And then I've done some great things that have really succeeded, but,
And some of them we took as a learning experience, and some of them we did not.
And we did not. Right. Exactly. Some we took as a learning experience, and some we took at the time as a character flaw, or as, or maybe something, the whole blame game where someone else was to blame.
Yeah. Or here's my favorite. Are you ready for this?
Yeah, tell me.
It just wasn't meant to be. What?
Well, I can, in some ways,
me, ladies and gentlemen.
In some ways, I can agree with that, but that might be something I get to along with. Oh, it didn't work, but knowing that it wasn't meant to be for that reason, like it failed, or something wasn't right, or it wasn't set up properly, or something. And that, taking that and thinking to myself, okay, I'll use that. But that's not the kind of be all end all phrase where I say that and I stop there and I don't learn from it. So when you say that, it makes me laugh, because I'm like,
because guess what? It wasn't up to me.
That's right.
If it wasn't meant to be, it wasn't up to me. But when you say it didn't work, then you can say, well, what about it didn't work?
That's
what can I do differently? How can I bring my science mind to this situation and get out of the way long enough to see where the power is in doing it another way,
Right. And it's just so funny. It wasn't meant to be. Because I can hear my mother saying that.
Well, and it was like when we first started going to church, we heard about God's will a lot, you know? And of course, I never said anything out loud to anybody, but I thought to myself, this is someone who's going to be really dissatisfied in their life for a very, very long time and have a darn good reason for it. If God doesn't want you to have it, then what's the point of trying? And it's like, you know what I'm saying? It's like we could do so much more and have it go this way. God wants you to try again, you know? And if you want to make God happy, don't give up. You know, whatever. But the point is anything worth having is worth going at until it's accomplished and not quitting like so many people do right before they're successful. Have you ever seen that?
Hmm.
I watched a person I love get all the way to 3 credits from a master's degree and said, I really don't want to do this. I mean, literally, this is like doing this nights and weekends for 3.5 years to get to the master's degree and have 1 3-credit course to complete all the requirements and then, take her test, whatever it was. Said, no, I'm good. The thing I wanted to do with this master's degree is no longer important to me, so I don't need the master's degree. I'm still trying like a son of a gun to understand. And I don't think it's one of those things that's about understanding it. You know what I mean? It's more about just getting it.
Right. And
Oh,
yeah, and I think that happens some like well that happens partly I think because or a lot because especially if it's not, let's say, yourself, because we're looking from the outside. So no matter what we think, we kind of can't get the emotional mental place that that person was in
yes.
to kind of come up with that decision. And I think we do that all the time with certain people. Like, like I have a niece who has, went to college and is pretty bright, and she had wanted to possibly be a nurse or a midwife, and she would have been absolutely phenomenal. And she hasn't done that. And part of
Right.
me is, in a way, feels kind of, I guess, a little bit sad in the fact that because I think she would be brilliant at it.
Yep.
A lot of times we see things for other people that they don't see for themselves, or for whatever reason, it's just not of importance to her anymore. You know, she's now married. She and her husband travel an immense amount. Um, thankfully they can afford it. And so they travel abroad and do all these fun trips together, and that's not a priority. And I think that, I part of me can't understand it, and then part of me can. Like, I mean, I think she's living a pretty good life, so I think she's, not pressured or doesn't feel like she wants to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. It really comes down to, I think probably more for our generation, I would have to do some study with a lot of different people who have are coming up into their 20s, 30s, and 40s now to be able to generalize whether or not what I'm about to say would hold any water with them. But our generation, speaking for myself, you had to have an idea of where you wanted to end up at an early age to really ever be successful, because otherwise you would never do the things in life in the order and sequence that would be required, that magical formula that people know that you don't, that they're successful because they had somebody told them, if you do this, then this, then this, then this, you'll be a doctor, or you'll be a business owner, or you'll be a senator, or whatever. And no one ever told the truth about that. No, I got here by accident. Almost everyone got there by accident. I can now look back and say that's how that worked. And so when I think someone during the last 30 or 40 years, aging at my age, would look at something, they would say, I want to accomplish X. And to get to X, there's a requirement that I have this, and then X will be possible. And when they find out that the this is nonsensical, they give up on the X. They completely lose their mind and forget why they were doing all this in the first place. And they were doing the mundane. I mean, I'm going to tell you, reading 2 books a week, study groups, all of that sort of nonsense, that is mundane. And if you don't do it, you don't succeed. But by the time you get done doing it, you're pretty much set up for life. You now know how to, work in a team, how to, work under a deadline, all these things that just come to you because you built those habits.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if I stop and think about, making a difference with children, or making a difference, with medicine, or making a difference with a community, and there's one last thing that you've got to do, to be able to pull that off, and you just say, I could, but I'm no longer interested in doing that one last thing, and somebody else can take care of the children or the community or medicine. What if?
What if? Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I look at the people that I consider, like, I would label as being successful or great people or great thinkers. And they all share this thread of um not being a conformist, not being, really thinking outside of the box,
Yep.
or really thinking as if there is no box, like,
Yep.
and they're inspiring, and they really did. I mean, they didn't have easy lives, most of them. They had definite challenges as to, whether it be life challenges or relationship challenges or family challenges. I mean, they didn't come from, you know, easy backgrounds necessarily, but there's this something that's common shared. Maybe it is the fact that, was this feeling of doing something for a cause or having a purpose that was definitely more than just themselves.
Yep. And there are people who get stuck trying to identify that for themselves. And sometimes you have to get engaged in something that is all about failing before you can even discover about yourself what when people say what I'm passionate about. No, you have to learn how to be passionate. There is no place where passion lives and you go find it. The passion is in you, and you either learn how to turn it on and access it for yourself, like a power, like being able to see or hear or smell. That access to passion is like breathing. And when you get to a point in your life where you've done something and you start to feel that relationship to an end goal, then that's what life looks like. That's where living is. However, it's in that area of things you don't know until you've had a chance to experience it.
Absolutely. And it usually is. And the things you don't, like you said, you don't know. And you don't even know that you don't know them until all of a sudden someone says something.
Yes.
Or you read something and it sparks. And I like the word spark. It kind of sparks something within you, whether it be a question. Usually it's probably a question, or something gets like, you're like, oh. And it could be the way someone phrase. That's why it's so interesting, because I listen to so many different people, and a lot of times you might say they're saying the same thing.
Yeah.
And they probably are to some extent, but in the place I am on that given day, or the way that person phrased something, all of a sudden you're like, oh, now I get it. Or now, the light bulb, all of a sudden you turn on the light, and you're like, oh, it's so interesting uh, that because I have that all the time when I talk to people about health, and then my mother will call me and say, I was listening to so and so, and I've said that same thing for the past 10 years. But, there's something about, me saying it versus, someone else saying it sometimes. And sometimes it's just the point in time where, at that point you weren't ready to hear it. You couldn't hear it.
Yeah. So being able to hear it also means being able to be exposed to it as well in some cases. You cannot inspire excellence while you're teaching everybody to shoot for the middle. Okay. The one person's middle is not another person's middle. And
Mhm.
quite frankly, the opportunity to be excellent has absolutely nothing to do with anybody else. Excellence is a comparison of what you can produce versus what you're capable of producing if you knew you could. And how do you know you can? You do it until you fail, and then you get good at that. And then you do that until you fail, and then you get good at that. And then you do. So life is just this long string of cleaning the bathroom, making your bed, all of the things that are a real freaking nuisance while you got to do them when you'd much rather be doing almost anything else in the world. But then you decide, and this is where the passion gets unlocked. Let me see if I can do like this little particular fold while I'm, making the bed and putting the sheets together. And let me just see, that if I adjust the curtains, on the window a particular way, how does that light hit the bed? And how can I walk into a space and forget that I was the one that prepared that space and just be inspired by what a great space it is. And the same thing is with food, and the same thing is with playing golf or playing bridge or poker or being in science or whatever it is. But when you learn to unleash the passion inside of you that's there, like turn it on. You've got a gas bottle filled with passion in you. Light that baby up and get busy in your life. Enjoy it. Have fun.
I mean, absolutely. And I think it is like everything. I think the more we practice it, the easier we can access it. It's like
Yes.
find small things that excite you, small things that excite you, and start there. And then see where it goes, because I think it's almost we get so trained by whatever society, family, whatever, to play it small, to not press the boundaries, not even go into where we feel passion,
Yes.
that we forget. Or I think children can, if you watch children play, children
Yes.
are so enthusiastic, they're so passionate. I just remember, because it's now summertime, and I remember when I was a kid going to the beach and building these massive like cities out of rocks and sand, of like
Yeah.
where we would make roads and we would put moats and we would build, like we would line all these little rocks on the side of the road, like they were like, for hours and hours and hours.
Yep.
And it didn't matter, like, we knew that water was going to come, especially if it was like it had waves, and it was going to be wiped out by the next day. And you knew that, and you were like, okay, well, tomorrow I'll go back and I'll just rebuild it, and
Yes.
I'll try again and I'll do it. And if it's slightly different, it's slightly different, which it was going to be, because it wasn't, it wasn't going to be exactly the same. And that was okay. But there was such, I mean, I think of myself, there was such passion in what I was doing.
And we didn't know what it was. We just were having the time of our life, and time went by quickly.
Right. Oh, yes. and how many hours I realized that I used to do that.
It's crazy good. Well, I don't know about you, kiddo. I could do this for the whole rest of the day.
I could also. Yeah, I know. I'm
But
loving this conversation.
But I'm noticing we're over our hour, and I don't think that matters to anyone except for it might be a good place for us to put a little bit of a pause. And any thoughts that you have to kind of wrap up?
No, I mean, it's just like start to get curious about like, how do you label passion? Like, what does the word itself even mean to you? And notice maybe in your lives the things that you do feel passionate about, like, or that excite you if you don't want to use the word passion. So,
Yeah. Something that makes you feel alive. Something that validates that today was worth getting out of bed. Like, holy cow, I could have missed this,
that's right.
And
today
then
will be this conversation, Bill.
It was wonderful again, my friend, and we had a lot of firsts today, including a jet flying over, which was pretty cool, and it rained, and it's all part of the world,
Absolutely.
Well, God bless you, my good friend. I appreciate you and I love you, and thank you again for your chatting with me every week.
Oh, same here, Bill.
Folks at home, we are lighting the candle, a world that works, and it's our pleasure to be hanging out with you as well. Have the best week ever, and have a safe 4th of July, and we'll see you again soon. Bye-bye for now.
You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, a World That Works, part of the Exvadio Podcast Network. You can catch every episode as well as the rest of the network at exvadio.com, the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts.